In the 1920s, in small towns across America, people would stop on the street at night because girls were walking home from work, glowing in the dark. Their dresses shimmered, their hair sparkled. When one of them blew her nose, her handkerchief lit up. The local boys called them the Ghost Girls, and every young woman in town envied them because the Ghost Girls had the best job around. Good pay, clean work, and that beautiful magical shine. Nobody told them the shine was a death sentence. This is the story of the Radium Girls, the young women who were poisoned by the most glamorous job in America, told by their own company that they were perfectly healthy, and who then did something extraordinary, dying, some of them too weak to raise a hand in court. They took on a corporation and changed the world so completely that the laws they forced into existence still protect you, today, at your own job. In our videos on the history of beauty, we saw women suffer for their looks. This time, beauty itself glowed. Stay to the end, because the last fact in this story about their graves is the one you will never forget. It began with a miracle. In 1898, Marie and Pierre Curie discovered a new element, radium. It destroyed tumors. It glowed with a pale, unearthly light, all by itself, seemingly forever. Newspapers called it liquid sunshine, and the world completely lost its mind. Within a few years, radium was the most fashionable substance on Earth, and companies stuffed it into everything. Radium toothpaste for a radiant smile, radium face creams and powders, beauty that literally glowed, radium water, sold as a health tonic that cured everything from arthritis to low energy. There were radium chocolates in Germany, radium cigarettes in Japan, radium wool for babies. Hotels advertised radium spas. Society hostesses served faintly glowing cocktails. Doctors prescribed it. Advertisements promised it would restore youth, cure blindness, straighten your spine. And the rich sipped their miracle openly. One famous American millionaire, the industrialist and playboy Eben Byers, drank bottled radium water every single day for years, convinced it kept him young. Remember his name. We'll come back to him, and to the newspaper headline about his jaw that shocked America. Because here is what almost nobody understood in those years. Radium doesn't just glow. It replaces the calcium in your bones. Your skeleton drinks it in, mistaking poison for nourishment. And then the poison sits inside you, burning, for the rest of your life. The scientists had clues from the very beginning. Marie Curie herself suffered radiation burns. Handling her own notebooks today requires protective gear. But the companies selling liquid sunshine had no interest in clues. There was too much money in the glow. Now come to Orange, New Jersey. The year is 1917, and America has just entered the First World War. Soldiers in the trenches need watches they can read in the dark, and airplane instruments and gun sights. The answer is radium paint, a luminous green-white mixture with a beautiful brand name, Undark. And painting those tiny watch dials requires small hands, patience, and delicacy. So the United States Radium Corporation hires girls, hundreds of them, some as young as 14. They come in pairs and clusters of sisters and cousins and best friends, because when you land the best job in town, the first thing you do is bring your family. The Maggia family alone sent 3 sisters to the studio. Remember that family name. It will carry more sorrow than any other in this story. And for these daughters of working families, it's a dream. The pay is among the best a young woman can earn in America. The fastest painters make several times what a factory girl gets. The work is clean and light. No soot, no machines, no danger anyone can see. You're paid by the dial, so quick hands mean real money. The best painters out-earn their own fathers. The studio is full of friends and sisters, gossip and laughter. And there's glamour. You are helping the boys at the front, and you leave work sparkling like a Christmas ornament. The technique they are taught is the heart of this whole tragedy. 3 little words: lip, dip, paint. To keep the brush tip perfectly fine, you point it with your lips, then dip it in the radium paint, then paint the dial. Lip, dip, paint. Hundreds of dials a day, thousands of tiny brush strokes, and with every single one, a girl swallows a little radium. They asked, of course. Some girls asked the managers directly, "Is this safe?" And the company told them yes, completely harmless. Some were even told the glow would put roses in their cheeks. So the girls relaxed and had fun with it. They painted their fingernails with undark. They painted their teeth to surprise their boyfriends with a glowing smile in the dark. Before dances, some dusted the powder on their dresses and in their hair. They were teenagers, licking radioactive paint hundreds of times a day on their company's word of honor. One of them, Catherine Schaub, was 14 when she started, and thrilled enough to write about the studio in her diary, a lively, dreamy girl who wanted to be a writer someday. She would eventually get her wish, in the cruelest way possible. Years later, her published account of what happened in that studio would help shock the nation. Meanwhile, and this is the detail that turns the story from tragedy into crime, in the laboratory of that same company, the chemists handled radium with lead screens, protective aprons, and long tongs. The men who knew protected themselves. The girls who trusted pointed their brushes with their lips. The first signs came quietly, a few years later, and they came to the dentists. Young women from the Dial studio began arriving with toothaches that wouldn't heal. A tooth was pulled, the socket refused to close, then the next tooth. Then came ulcers, and pain in the jaw that no treatment could touch. One dentist, working on a former Dial painter, gently touched her jawbone, and a piece of it simply came away in his hand. The bone underneath wasn't broken, it was honeycombed, eaten from the inside, like moth-eaten fabric. Doctors were baffled. The girls were young, in their early 20s. They were also becoming anemic, exhausted. Some began to limp as their hips crumbled, and they kept coming from the same address. In 1922, a Dial painter named Molly Maggia, 24 years old, died after a year of agony. And here the company showed its true face for the first time. The cause entered on her death certificate was syphilis, a lie, but a brilliantly cruel one. It didn't just explain away her death, it smeared her name, and it terrified other sick girls into silence. What respectable young woman would come forward if this was what they'd write about her? It would take 5 years and an exhumation for science to prove what really killed Molly Maggia. In October 1927, with the lawsuits looming, her coffin was raised and opened before witnesses and experts. What they found settled the question forever. 5 years in the ground, and her bones were still intensely radioactive. Photographic film placed against them fogged over with a ghostly white print, as if the skeleton were taking its own picture. There was no syphilis. There never had been. The company had slandered a dying 24-year-old to protect its paint, and now her own bones testified against them. Her sisters, Quinta and Albina, who had painted beside her in the same studio, were already sick themselves. They would soon face the company in court. Let's be precise about what the United States Radium Corporation knew, and when, because this is all documented. By the mid-1920s, the company had commissioned its own expert study of conditions in the studio. The report came back devastating. The girls were being poisoned, so the company buried it and publicly cited other, friendlier experts instead. When health officials asked questions, executives denied everything. When sick girls asked for help with medical bills, they were turned away. The official position, repeated for years, was simple. Radium was harmless. The deaths were coincidence, or the girls' own diseases. And the bitterest twist, the scientist who had invented undark paint, Dr. Sabin von Sokaki, watched the evidence grow with mounting horror, because he was sick too. The inventor of the paint would eventually die of his own creation, his blood so damaged that doctors could barely believe he was still walking. Radium didn't care whose side you were on. By 1925, a brilliant county medical examiner, Dr. Harrison Martland, had developed tests that proved it beyond argument. The Dial painters were carrying radium inside their bones, and it was killing them slowly, in ways medicine had never seen. The science was now settled. Dr. Martland began keeping a list, a quiet, terrible document that the newspapers would later learn about, a register of Dial painters who were already doomed, whose bones carried enough radium to guarantee their fate, years before symptoms would show. Medicine could diagnose them now. It just couldn't save them. The company's response was to hire more lawyers. This is where one name changes everything. Grace Fryer. Grace had painted Dials in orange during the war. A bank clerk now, elegant, sharp, and increasingly ill. Her spine was collapsing, and she would eventually need a steel back brace just to sit upright. In 1925, Grace decided to sue. It took her 2 years just to find a lawyer. Think about that. 2 years in which law firm after law firm looked at a dying young woman with an airtight case and turned her away because no one wanted to fight a rich corporation and because the law itself seemed rigged. The statute of limitations said you had to sue within 2 years of being harmed. But radium takes 5-10 years to show itself. By the time you knew it was killing you, your right to justice had legally expired. Finally, in 1927, a young attorney named Raymond Barry took the case, and Grace was joined by 4 other dying dial painters, including 2 sisters of Molly Maggia. The newspapers found the story and gave it a name that gripped the entire country: the case of the 5 women doomed to die. America was transfixed and horrified. At one hearing, some of the women were too weak to raise their arms to take the oath. 2 were carried to the courtroom, and when the court proposed adjourning the case for months, as if these plaintiffs had months, the public outrage went international. Even Marie Curie herself was asked to comment from Paris. In June 1928, days before a key hearing, the company settled. Each woman received a lump sum, a yearly pension, and, crucially, all medical costs for life. The company admitted no guilt. It never would. It wasn't full justice. But 5 dying girls had dragged a corporation into the light, in front of the whole world, and the world was now watching. Editorials thundered. Scientists resigned from company payrolls. And in homes across America, thousands of working women read the coverage and understood, some for the first time, that a paycheck was not the same thing as consent to be poisoned. Grace Fryer spent her settlement years in her steel brace, giving interviews, refusing self-pity, sharp as ever. She had been told by 20 law firms that she had no case. She had been told by her employer that she was perfectly well. She outlived both lies, not by long, but long enough to see them buried. You would think, after headlines like these, that no company would ever dare do it again. Stay with me. Because 800 miles west, in a little town in Illinois, another radium company had read the same headlines and decided they were a public relations problem. The town was Ottawa, Illinois, and the company was called Radium Dial. Same industry, same paint, same technique, lip, dip, paint, and the same young Catholic working-class girls who thought they'd won the job lottery. When news of the New Jersey scandal reached Ottawa, the girls got nervous. So the company took out a full-page notice in the local paper, reassuring the town. Their employees were in no danger. The New Jersey business didn't apply here. What the company did not print was that its own medical tests on the Ottawa girls had already come back, showing the same contamination. Results the girls themselves were never shown. They kept painting, lip, dip, paint. And a few years later, it began again. The aching teeth, the crumbling jaws, the young women on crutches. One of them was Catherine Wolfe Donahue, a quiet, devout woman who had loved this job and who now watched her own body fail piece by piece while raising 2 small children. When she and her sick friends began meeting to support each other and seek justice, the press gave their little group a name straight out of a horror film, and the women wore it with defiance: the Society of the Living Dead. Catherine's fight went further than anyone's. By the time her case reached its climax in 1938, she weighed less than a child. The final hearing had to be held in her own home because she could no longer be moved. She gave testimony from her bed, and she won. The ruling came, the company appealed, and appealed again, and lost every time. And the company? When the Ottawa scandal finally broke, Radium Dial didn't repent, it relocated. The operation quietly wound down, and a new dial painting firm opened its doors nearby. Same business, fresh name, Luminous processes. The town needed jobs, the jobs needed girls. It took the force of Catherine's precedent, and the new laws that followed, to finally end the practice for good. Catherine Donahue died a few months after her victory, at 35. She had spent her last strength not on herself, the money could no longer save her, but on setting a precedent so that no company could ever again poison its workers and call it a coincidence. Here is what those dying young women actually won for all of us. The radium cases became a turning point in American labor law. Industrial disease, being slowly poisoned by your job, became something workers could finally sue over, and the absurd time limits that had almost destroyed Grace Fryer's case were rewritten. The right to a safe workplace, the safety standards, the compensation systems, the direct ancestors of the protections at your job, today, wherever you are watching this, run straight back through those courtrooms. And there's more. When American scientists of the next generation needed to understand what radioactivity does inside a human body, including during the atomic projects of the 1940s, the most important data on Earth came from studying the dial painters. The safety limits that protect nuclear and medical workers to this day were built on the bones of the Radium Girls. Their tragedy is the reason it never happened again on that scale. The world's first safe exposure limits for radioactivity inside a human body were calculated directly from the dial painters' cases, and scientists followed the surviving Radium Girls for decades into their old age, learning from their bodies how to protect everyone else's. Rarely in history have so few unwilling people saved so many strangers. As for the glow itself, the world finally sobered up. Remember Eben Byers, the millionaire who drank radium water every day? He died in 1932, his skull and jaw devastated, and the Wall Street Journal ran a headline so blunt it ended the radium tonic industry almost overnight. The radium water worked fine, it said, until his jaw came off. And one last thing, the fact I promised you at the start. Radium's half-life is about 1,600 years, which means that in the quiet cemeteries of New Jersey and Illinois, a century later, the Radium Girls are still there. And if you passed a Geiger counter over certain graves, it would still click. Their bones still carry the shine they were promised was harmless. They will glow, faintly, for more than 1,000 years, the longest burning evidence in legal history. The Ghost Girls were ordinary young women, teenagers who trusted the people they worked for. They were lied to, poisoned, smeared, and abandoned. And in the last months of their lives, too weak to stand, they did more to protect future workers than any government of their time. So here's my question for you, and I genuinely want to know. The companies knew and chose profit. What punishment would have been just? And could you have kept quiet, like some did, to protect the best paycheck in town? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If this story gripped you, you'll want our history of female beauty, where women paid for shine in 100 other ways. It's on your screen right now. Click it and subscribe to Silent Past so you never miss the next true story.